Philippians 4:6, number 5 on our top 10 most searched for Bible verses on the internet. Now, I think you're really going to appreciate this video because we have reasons these days to feel anxious, to have concerns, namely the pandemic and the whole fallout as a result of it. And yet, the man who penned this verse, he faced far greater circumstances than we do today, and yet he was able to overcome his fears and his anxieties. Hi everyone, I'm Mark Leeming and welcome to the Thursday Bible Brief. Well, it's official. We're now halfway through our top 10 most searched for Bible verses on the internet, with Philippians 4:6 being number 5. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Now, the Apostle Paul, he was in prison when he penned that verse, when he wrote that entire letter to the Philippians. Now, he was in jail not because of any genuine crime he had committed, but simply because he was a Christian. He was a famous preacher, and some people didn't like that, so they had him arrested. And he was awaiting trial, which ultimately would determine whether he would live or die. And so, yeah, he had reasons to be anxious. And what's more is that the Philippians, the people who he was writing to, although they themselves were not in prison at the time, nevertheless that prospect hung over their heads. And so Paul wrote this letter. One of the reasons why he wrote this letter was to encourage them to stand firm in the faith. Now, an important point that I should mention here is that when Paul wrote in Philippians 4:6 that they were not to be anxious about anything, he wasn't literally meaning that they would never feel anxious, that they would never feel worried, that they would never feel fearful. I mean, of course they would. They faced persecution. They faced the risk of jail time. They faced having their property, their homes confiscated. They faced having their entire lives ruined. Of course they would feel anxious, but Paul was urging them that in spite of those feelings to step out in faith and trust God. You see, unfortunately, in some quarters of the church at least, there's this wrong idea of what faith is. Some view faith like, say, a Buddhist would view enlightenment, that somehow faith is a mental state of oblivion, that it's nirvana, free from all desire, thoughts, and feelings. But that's not what faith is. Faith is trusting in God in spite of feelings, in spite of your circumstances. Faith is like courage. Courage doesn't mean that you're literally fearless. Rather, it means that you're able to do brave things in spite of those fears. Now, another important point to remember here is that Paul wasn't telling the Philippians that they didn't need to worry, they didn't need to be anxious, because just as long as they prayed hard enough, then God would make everything okay, that he wouldn't allow them to suffer or be persecuted. But clearly that couldn't have been what he meant. After all, one of the major overarching themes in this letter was about the Christian and suffering. And furthermore, in chapter 1, he told the Philippians that it was granted on their behalf not only to believe in Christ, but also to suffer for him. Now, obviously, for us modern Western Christians, suffering is not on our spiritual radar screen, and that's largely because we've so intertwined the gospel with the American dream that we actually think that the gospel is about this life, that it's about our wants, our desires. But that's not what the gospel is about. Now, obviously today, for now at least, we don't face the same trials and temptations as the early church did. And we need to be thankful for that. We need to be thankful that we live in free countries where we can go to church without fear of persecution. But let's really focus on what is important in this life. That what's important in this life is not having a larger house, a fancier car, a bigger paycheck. What's important in this life is that we are willing to follow Christ no matter how the chips of life may fall. Actually, the very first video we did in this series was Philippians 4:7, the verse that precedes today's verse. And you may want to watch that video. I'll provide the end card over there. And if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing, and I hope to see all of you next Thursday. Thanks for watching.